Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just jump straight into this because it's heavy, but it's incredibly important. We are rapidly approaching the 80th anniversary of August 1945, the month the world was just fundamentally forever changed by the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, for decades, the sheer, unimaginable horror of those events acted like this unspoken boundary line in global conflict. You just didn't cross it. But today, separated by an 80-year gap, we're seeing a really terrifying shift. Geopolitical tensions are rising, and the unthinkable is suddenly being casually talked about again. To really understand the contemporary relevance of the nuclear shadow hanging over us right now, we have to look back at the historical trauma of the past.
Right now, we constantly hear modern leaders tossing around nuclear threats in this incredibly detached, almost clinical way. I mean, you hear official statements like, "We reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression," as if it's just standard policy. Whether we're reading headlines about nuclear enrichment facilities or listening to leaders treat these weapons like mere strategic tools in some giant geopolitical chess match, the rhetoric is escalating. And it's terrifying because we've somehow normalized the language of mass destruction. We've stripped away the reality of what these weapons actually do.
But we absolutely have to shatter that clinical detachment. Kyoko Gibson, a survivor of the Hiroshima bombing, known in Japan as a Hibakusha, offers us this incredibly visceral reality check. She said, "Land of hell Hiroshima was, and that was a man-made hell." Think about that. This wasn't a hurricane or an earthquake, it was a conscious human choice. Kyoko's words immediately ground us in the true human cost here. Because when politicians today throw around buzzwords like escalation and deterrence, what they're actually talking about is recreating the exact same man-made hell that Kyoko and others miraculously survived.
Okay, part one, the rising modern threat and this renewed arms race.
When you look around the globe, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine bringing back those Cold War-era fears to escalating tensions with Iran, India, and Pakistan, we are seeing the very real possibility of nuclear conflict reignited. Now, the fear of a devastating retaliatory attack, what we call deterrence, is a big reason these weapons still even exist. But as these global conflicts drag on, that deterrence feels incredibly fragile. To put this into perspective, there are a staggering 12,000 nuclear weapons in the world today. 12,000! And they're held in the hands of just 9 countries. What's truly terrifying here is that the weapons making up this immense global arsenal today are many, many times more powerful than the experimental bombs used back in World War II.
Which brings us to part two, August 1945, the man-made hell. To really grasp the reality of those 12,000 modern weapons, we have to strip away the statistics and look at what a nuclear blast actually does to a living, breathing city. So how do we get there? Well, in 1940, the Axis pact united Germany, Italy, and Japan in this massive strategy of terror. By December 1941, Japan launched that devastating surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, killing over 2,400 people. In the months following that, America kicked off a top-secret operation harnessing nuclear fission to create the world's very first atomic bomb. And finally, in August 1945, after Japan rejected a strict ultimatum to stop fighting, the bombs were dropped. This ultimately led to Japan's formal surrender in September, bringing the brutal war in Asia to an abrupt end.
But man, that abrupt end came at a cost that is frankly incomprehensible. On August 6th at 8:15 in the morning, an experimental bomb with the force of 20,000 tons of TNT was dropped on Hiroshima, which was a major military headquarters at the time. Out of a population of 350,000 residents, a staggering 78,000 were killed instantly, just gone, in a single blinding flash. And then, just 3 days later, the US launched a second mission on Nagasaki, where another 40,000 citizens died immediately.
Nearly a quarter of Hiroshima's population vanished in a fraction of a second, and a heartbreaking number of them were just school children. I want you to consider the stark contrast of that destruction for a moment. At places like Honkawa Primary School, the physical force of the blast was so terrifyingly hot it literally melted glass and metal right through thick concrete walls and floors. It left scorch marks underground. Now contrast that immense, unyielding concrete melting power against the absolute fragility of the human body. Think about the school children who were just playing outside in the playground that morning. What possible chance did a human being have against something that powerful?
The true devastation was brought down to this deeply human, physical level by the people who actually managed to emerge from the rubble. Take Mikio, for example. He was just 13 years old when the blast wave completely collapsed his house, plunging him into this pitch-black dust. He recalls the sheer horror of it vividly. He said, "First I smelled the burnt hair. Skin was peeling off, and they were like rags. You couldn't tell if they were male or female.
The intense heat had literally shriveled people's hair and ruined their faces. It was just an apocalyptic wasteland in every direction.
Moving on to Part 3, the enduring fallout and decades of suffering.
You see, for the Hibakusha, actually surviving the initial blast, that was merely the beginning of the nightmare. They were about to face this invisible, lifelong horror with multifaceted impacts that would span the next 8 decades. Physically, the blast released enormous amounts of toxic radiation, causing seemingly healthy people to just randomly begin dying. But what made this tragedy so much worse was that during the subsequent US occupation, American authorities heavily censored reporting on the medical effects of the bomb. So, in this total vacuum of reliable information, survivors didn't just face physical cancers and extreme psychological terror, they faced rampant social misinformation, outright fear, and deep, deep societal prejudice from their own countrymen.
Let's zoom in on that specific daily terror of radiation sickness for a second. Immediately after the bombing, survivors quickly learned that if their hair fell out when they ran a comb through it, it was basically a death sentence. It signaled death within 4 to 5 days. Imagine the immense, paralyzing anxiety of waking up every single morning and just gently pulling your hair to see if you were going to die that week. And later on, they discovered this radiation caused permanent gene damage. Look at survivor Satoshi Tanaka. He wasn't even in the initial blast. He was exposed as an 18-month-old toddler when his mother carried him into the radioactive ruins. Since then, he has endured a staggering 6 cancer surgeries.
This immense physical and social burden is perfectly captured by one survivor who simply stated, "It is hell to die, but it is also hell to live." The prejudice in Japan became so severe that many survivors who moved to other cities literally had to hide their Hiroshima origins. People would physically move away from them on trains, terrified that the radiation was somehow infectious. Relatives of potential spouses would outright cancel weddings, refusing to let their children marry a woman who had been exposed to the bomb. The emotional toll of just trying to live a normal life was profound and inescapable.
Which leads us to Part 4, Echoes from the Last Survivors and Their Urgent Warning. Today, people like Satoshi and Keiko are in their 80s. As the very last generation of survivors, they were actually recently part of a group awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their tireless efforts to bring about a world free of nuclear weapons. But as modern leaders start rattling that nuclear saber all over again, they know their work is dangerously unfinished. Their plea to the world is simple. Without telling, without showing what happened, no one can understand clearly. They view remembering as their ultimate legacy. It's a desperate, urgent mission to share their testimonies and issue a global warning for disarmament, for as long as they are still alive to speak the truth.
And this generational warning is being echoed by the descendants of the survivors too. As one granddaughter points out, with our advancing technology, it's all too easy to take out the human side of things and just make it entirely about the tech, the deterrence, or the bomb itself. But the true horror of the bomb lies squarely in its impact on human lives. It is the human factor, the actual flesh and blood consequences, that absolutely must remain at the very center of this conversation.
Which leaves us with a final lingering thought. Deterrence and compromise? Well, they've worked so far, keeping Hiroshima and Nagasaki as the only places on Earth to have ever experienced this unique, man-made disaster. But as the last generation of witnesses, literally the only people alive who truly know what an atomic bomb actually does leaves us, a massive void of lived memory is opening up. If they are gone, and politicians and generals are no longer listening to their firsthand stories, how will we get our leaders to really understand what it means to push the button? It's up to us to carry their memory forward. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.